When Congress returns after the elections on Tuesday, it'll face one of the most hotly debated issues in the campaign, raising taxes on the rich. That's President Obama's position, to keep the Bush tax cuts in place except for those on the wealthiest 2% as a way to reduce the dreaded deficit. It's an idea already percolating among the governors. 8 states have increased so-called millionaire income taxes so far as a way of avoiding drastic budget cuts on health and education. And on Tuesday, voters could make Washington state the 9th. But with our national debt in the trillions, budget experts will tell you that just taxing the rich isn't enough. One Republican brave enough to go public is David Stockman, President Reagan's budget director. He says all the Bush tax cuts should be eliminated, even those on the middle class. And he says his own Republican Party has gone too far with its anti-tax religion. Tax cutting is a religion. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's become, in the sense, an absolute, something that can't be questioned, something that's gospel, something that's sort of embedded in the catechism. And so scratch the average Republican today, and he'll say tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts.
Cut taxes.
Cutting taxes.
Make the tax cuts permanent.
It's rank demagoguery. We should call it for what it is. If these people were all put into a room on penalty of death to come up with how much they could cut, they couldn't come up with $50 billion when the problem is $1.3 trillion. So to stand before the public and rub raw this anti-tax sentiment, the Republican Party, as much as it pains me to say this, should be ashamed of themselves.
This from Ronald Reagan's old budget director, architect of the largest tax cut in American history? But he doesn't let the Democrats off the hook. He says he cringes when he hears the president say things like this.
Now, I believe we ought to make the tax cuts for the middle class permanent.
We have now got both parties essentially telling a big lie with a capital B and a capital L to the public. And that is that we can have all this government, 24% of GDP, this huge entitlement program, all of the bailouts, and yet we don't have to tax ourselves and pay our bills. That's delusional.
Why isn't this statement correct? We cannot really deal with the deficit until we get our recovery underway.
The recovery has already happened. It is weak. It is tepid.
How can you say the recovery has happened when we have 10% unemployment?
The unemployment rate is not going to drop by any material amount anytime soon. And we're going to be in a period of austerity. We've had a 30-year spree of really phony prosperity in this country.
Now our national debt is growing by $100 billion a month. For those who say cutting spending is the answer, Stockman says both parties have thrown in the towel on that.
Finally, even the Republicans have said there's nothing significant we want to cut. They don't want to cut Social Security entitlements. They don't want to cut Medicare reimbursement to doctors, farm subsidies, education loans for middle-class students, certainly not defense.
Many of the states are in the same boat, facing huge deficits with few prospects for cutting, which is why Washington state is joining the movement across the country to tax the rich.
Hey, everybody.
On Tuesday, voters will decide on Initiative 1098 that would create an income tax, but only on the wealthy, of whom there are many, 133,000 millionaires and 7 billionaires, including Bill Gates of Microsoft.
Thank you.
His father, Bill Gates Sr., has poured his own money into backing Initiative 1098.
Some people say Initiative 1098 is about soaking the rich.
The tax would bring in $3 billion a year to be spent mainly on education, which has suffered cutbacks as the state reels under a massive deficit.
Vote yes on 1098. It's good for Washington.
Washington is one of only 7 states without any income tax. The proposal would create a 5% rate on income over $200,000 for individuals and $400,000 for couples. A 9% rate kicks in at $500,000 on individuals and $1 million for couples. Let's say a couple earns $500,000.
Okay.
How much do you think they'll have to pay?
Well, they would pay $5,000 because that's 5% of the $100,000 on which they would pay.
Oh, they'd only pay on the 100,000. They're exempt up to the 400,000.
Precisely.
So they'd only pay on 100,000.
Precisely.
Well, it's not very much.
Precisely.
If you earn that kind of money.
Precisely.
His son Bill is on his side, along with the public employees unions. The other side is a who's who of the state's big businesses: Boeing, Amazon, and even Microsoft. Bill Gates is still chairman, but the CEO, Steve Ballmer, opposes the initiative, which is why they're calling this the Battle of the Billionaires. Is it awkward?
The word awkward fits, yes.
Ballmer's side argues that the Soak the Rich tax would stifle high-tech innovation and lead to businesses moving out of the state. We asked Microsoft, Amazon, and Boeing for interviews, but they all declined. Businesses are saying they'll leave.
Yes. The real truth of the matter is that the people that own businesses are the people who will be paying the tax, and my analysis is they don't want to pay the tax.
The rich guys don't want to.
The rich guys don't want to pay the tax.
Are you saying you just think they're greedy?
No, because it is. They're defensive. I guess you could call it greed, I suppose, wanting to not write another check, sure.
Steve Ballmer?
Yeah.
He's worth $14 billion. You don't think...
He's a very fine guy, too. The fact of the matter is there are 43 states in this country that have a state income tax. And in those states, the Microsofts or the ABCs, whatever, have not fled the state. I mean, it's just a gross exaggeration.
But entrepreneur Brian Mistley begs to disagree.
This initiative really is a nail in the coffin of small businesses and startups in our state. It really impacts the tech community very heavily.
Nail in the coffin? You mean kill it off?
That's correct.
Mistley is the CEO of Inrix, a software company that monitors traffic around the world and provides data for GPS systems and sites like MapQuest.
So this is a map of Paris.
He says businesses would leave the state, especially high-tech companies like his that deal in data and aren't tied down by factories or assembly lines. He'd consider moving some of his 60 employees to other states where he has offices. What are the states?
Massachusetts, Florida, California.
Massachusetts, income tax. Go ahead. California, income tax.
Texas, Florida, Michigan, Colorado.
Okay, 4 out of the 6 have income taxes. I mean, I've heard a lot of businessmen say what you're saying, and I keep wondering, well, where are they going to move if they leave?
Well, each state has its own competitive advantages. So by adding this additional burden, it makes us much less attractive.
Adam Stites is another entrepreneur who opposes the initiative. 5 years ago, he moved his company, iStores, from Portland, Oregon, across the Columbia River, to Vancouver, Washington, just 9 miles away.
It broke down to taxes. Oregon has the highest income tax in the United States, and Washington has the lowest at 0%.
iStores is the largest online retailer of paintball equipment. Stites has been hiring staff for a new company he acquired that sells prank novelties.
Is this for Halloween?
It is for Halloween, or for any times that you need to be a man-eating shark.
Under the new tax, he would have to pay $50,000 a year, and that, he says, would hamper his ability to expand any further. This money, if it passes, will go specifically to education, because they've been cutting schools and things like that. So what is Washington State supposed to do about its schools in terms of revenue?
I think that the state in aggregate needs to take a look at its expenses.
Like?
I've had opportunity in Portland to see cars being washed by third-party washing firms cleaning cars on the weekends for state vehicles. I don't have someone who comes that cleans my car in a van and waxes and washes it. It's in Portland, but I think it's indicative of government spending.
But the state budget has already been cut by $5 billion, and the governor, Christine Gregoire, says they're at the bone.
To cut people off hospice, I think, is immoral. To cut children off health care, to cut their education so they don't have a chance at a decent future, I think that would result in an immoral budget.
She says she doesn't understand why so many of the state's high-tech CEOs, who are always complaining about the woeful state of American education, are so opposed to paying this tax for schools. These businesses that want the educated workforce, they're against this. What do they say to you when you challenge them on this?
I tell them, I have the utmost respect for them. These are great CEOs. And I say to them, here's the problem. You always want us to invest more in education, and now you say no. So my question to you, if not this, then what? Don't just tell me no.
What do they say? What do they say?
They don't have an answer, Leslie.
The initiative was way ahead in the polls until the opposition started airing ads saying 1098 is a slippery slope.
And can be extended to you in just 2 years.
Polls now show the middle class thinks they too will be hit with income taxes. And the high-tech entrepreneurs we met say there's a fairness issue. Bill Gates got to start Microsoft without an income tax. And this is something you hear a lot, that they find it curious Gates is supporting an income tax now.
I believe the Gateses have already made most of their money, so they wouldn't be taxed under a new income tax structure in our state.
They wouldn't be taxed at all? No.
Well, for people who have already made their money and paid taxes in the state, that money wouldn't be taxed again. It's only for people who are earning new money in this state.
No, that's ridiculous. I mean, my son will pay a huge, huge income tax.
He will?
Come on, he's the richest man in the country. How can anybody think he isn't going to pay a huge income tax?
What is the income?
What does a person with $50 billion have for income?
It's on...
This conversation isn't making any sense.
Well, Bill Gates would pay multi-millions in taxes on the income from his investments. He wants to. He's told you that. He's for this.
Well, wants to is a little strong.
Okay, he's for this.
He is for it. He's very willing.
But as David Stockman will tell you, that attitude is hard to find.
We've demonized taxes, all right? We've created almost the idea that they're a metaphysical evil.
Still, he says there should be a one-time 15% surtax on the wealthy that he estimates would cut the national debt in half.
In 1985, the top 5% of the households, the wealthiest 5%, had net worth of $8 trillion, which is a lot. Today, after serial bubble after serial bubble, the top 5% have net worth of $40 trillion.
Oh my God.
And top 5% have gained more wealth than the whole human race had created prior to 1980.
Of course, it would never pass. There's the rub.
There's the rub.
The antipathy to raising taxes or making any real spending cuts, whether in Washington, D.C. or Washington State, is so intense, Stockman despairs that when Congress returns after the election, they'll do what they often do, nothing. I remember that great expression, let's kick the can down the road.
Yes.
That became kind of the mantra.
Yeah, and it still is today.
Just kick it down the road.
We're kicking the can down the road, except it's no longer a can. It's a giant junkyard.